They buried Jackson Ghost Mercer on a Tuesday in the rain, with the smell of exhaust still clinging to the leather of every man who came to watch him go into the ground. 8 years old, soaking wet, Mila Mercer broke through a wall of grieving bikers and pressed both palms flat against her father's casket. "He's not dead." Thunder split the sky. Nobody moved. Because the thing about Mila Mercer, the thing every man in that cemetery already knew but refused to say out loud, was that she had never been wrong about anything in her entire short life. And if she was right about this, then someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure the rest of them believed otherwise. This is Ghost Road, and if you've ever loved someone who disappeared without warning, you're going to want to stay until the very last word. Hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below. Let us know where in the world you're watching from tonight. And don't you dare look away. The cemetery sat on the eastern edge of Black Ridge, where the town stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. A working-class grid of cracked pavement, shuttered storefronts, and rust-streaked warehouses stacked along the river like bad memories nobody had gotten around to demolishing. The gates were iron, old, and the letter B had been missing from the Black Ridge Memorial sign for so long that most locals had forgotten it was ever there. Nobody had ever bothered to fix it. That said something about the town that the town itself would never admit. Rain came in sideways off the ridge that Tuesday morning, not the soft kind that cinematographers love and poets romanticize, the mean kind, the kind that found the gap between your collar and your neck and stayed there. The kind of rain that made you feel like the sky was personally annoyed with you. 41 motorcycles sat parked in 2 long rows outside the cemetery entrance, their engines cold, chrome handles glazed with water, headlights dark. The men who rode them stood in a loose formation near the freshly turned earth, leather jackets black with rain, hoods down, chins up. Every one of them over 30. Most of them carrying injuries that weren't visible and wouldn't be ever to anyone outside this circle. They stood the way veterans stand, not at attention, not at ease, but in that particular state of alert stillness that comes from spending years in situations where relaxing your body meant someone could be on top of you before your nervous system had time to respond. Nobody cried. That wasn't something anyone would have expected. The Warden Saints didn't do that publicly. They did it later, privately, in truck stop bathrooms and in the dark backs of bars and in the cabs of their bikes at 3 a.m, on empty highways where nobody could see the shape of grief working its way through a man's face. But here, in the open, in the rain, with the whole town watching from a respectful distance, they stood like iron posts, and they kept their faces closed. Ronan Graves stood closest to the grave. He was 52 years old, 6'2", 220 pounds of scar tissue and controlled damage. His hair had been gray since he was 38. Trauma did that sometimes, the doctor said. Though Ronan had stopped going to doctors around the same time he stopped going to Sunday dinners and holiday parties and all the other rituals that implied a person intended to keep existing in a conventional sense. His face was the kind of face that had clearly once been handsome and had since been rearranged by time and impact into something harder and more honest. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his jawline, pink and permanent. Souvenir of a roadside device outside Fallujah in 2004. He touched it sometimes when he was thinking, the way other people touched old photographs. He watched the casket and said nothing. That was Ronan's primary mode of operation in most situations. Observe, calculate, say nothing until silence became genuinely unworkable. It had kept him alive in 3 different countries and in a dozen situations that had killed men with faster mouths and slower eyes. What nobody at that funeral could have known, watching Ronan Graves stare at the casket with that particular flat expression, was that something was wrong with him in a very specific and immediate way. Not grief, exactly. Ronan had made an uncomfortable peace with grief years ago. What was working through him as he stood in the rain looking at the pine box being lowered into Black Ridge Cemetery soil was something closer to wrongness. The physical, instinctive sensation of standing in a room where the furniture had been moved 3 inches in every direction. Everything technically in the right place. Nothing actually right. He didn't know why yet. He was still working that out. Claire Mercer stood 20 feet away with her arms wrapped tight around her own torso, not crying either, though for different reasons than the men in leather. She was 36, dark-haired, thin in the way that suggested she'd been thin before this week and had lost another few pounds since the phone call came. She had the face of someone who had built a life around a difficult man and had been genuinely, unexpectedly fine with that choice, until suddenly she wasn't fine with anything. She wore a black dress that Ronan recognized as the same dress she'd worn to the funeral of Danny Reyes 2 years ago, which meant she hadn't bought a new one, which meant some part of her brain had been too overwhelmed to manage that detail, which meant she was worse off than she was showing. He filed that away. Mila Mercer stood next to her mother, 8 years old, dark hair like Claire's, eyes like Jackson's, that particular shade of amber that caught light in a way that made people pause mid-sentence when she looked at them directly. She wore a small dark coat that was slightly too short in the sleeves, rubber boots, and an expression that did not belong on an 8-year-old's face under any circumstances. It was not a grief expression. Ronan had been studying human expressions for 52 years across 4 continents, and he knew grief expressions, the unfocused eyes, the slack jaw, the fundamental confusion of a person whose internal architecture has been load-bearing on one specific truth and has just had that truth removed. Mila Mercer did not have that expression. She had the expression of someone who was very, very angry about something she couldn't yet prove. The officiant, a young man from the funeral home who was clearly uncomfortable with the crowd around him, was wrapping up. Standard language, celebration of life, taken too soon. Ronan let the words wash over him and continued studying the casket, the grave, the specific angle of the tire marks he'd noticed on the access road on the way in. The way that Deacon Marsh thought Jackson's second-in-command, standing 15 feet to Ronan's right, kept checking his phone while everyone else's phones were in their pockets. Then Mila moved. It happened fast. Claire reached for her and got empty air. Mila was through the gap between 2 senior members, Tank Oliveira and Priest, neither of them fast enough to react, and at the casket before anyone processed what was happening. She put both palms flat on the wet wood and she looked up at nothing in particular, at the sky, at the rain, at whatever she was looking at when she said the words. He's not dead. Thunder. Genuine, catastrophic, perfectly timed thunder that cracked across the sky at that exact moment like the whole atmosphere was weighing in. Nobody moved. 41 bikers and a cemetery full of Black Ridge residents stood completely still in the rain and the thunder's echo and said nothing. Claire reached her daughter. Baby. He's not dead, Mom. Mila's voice was not a child's panicked voice. It was steady. It was the voice of someone stating a verifiable fact that the surrounding adults were failing to take seriously. I know what I know. Mila. Claire's voice cracked on the second syllable. She pulled her daughter back from the casket and into her arms and held on tight, and Mila let herself be held but did not stop looking at the box in the ground, did not stop looking like someone who intended to win an argument. Ronan was already moving before he knew he'd decided to, not toward Mila, toward the access road. He wanted another look at those tire marks. He got 3 steps before Deacon Marsh's hand landed on his arm. She's 8, Deacon said. Low voice, casual tone. Grief does things to kids. Yeah, Ronan said. He looked at Deacon's hand on his arm until Deacon removed it. It does. He went to look at the tire marks. They were wrong. That was all he could say for certain at that point, standing in the rain at the edge of the access road with his hands in his jacket pockets. The wheelbase was wider than a standard vehicle. The tread depth was significant. Heavier vehicle. Someone had driven down this road within the last 72 hours in something that weighed more than a civilian truck and had then left. The groundskeeper's truck, he supposed. Except the groundskeeper's truck was a 15-year-old Ford F-150. He could see parked near the maintenance building, and its wheelbase was nowhere near this wide. He took a photograph with his phone, filed it away, went back to stand near the grave. The service ended. People dispersed in the slow, uncomfortable way of funeral dispersals. That particular social choreography of people who want to leave but are uncertain about the protocol. The bikers mounted their motorcycles in a sequence that had its own ceremony to it, engines coming alive in sequence, a sound like controlled thunder, and then the procession moved out of the cemetery gates and onto the road heading back toward the Warden Saints compound on the south side of Black Ridge. Ronan did not join the procession. He stayed at the grave until the last shovel of earth was in place, and the groundskeeper, a weathered man named Poole, who'd been working this cemetery for 30 years, had packed up his equipment. Then Ronan walked back to his bike, a matte black Harley Road King with no ornamentation, nothing personal on it, nothing that identified it or him beyond the small Warden Saints patch above the left saddlebag. He sat on it without starting it, lit a cigarette, smoked it in the rain. Jackson Mercer had been his best friend for 22 years. They'd met in the Corps. Jackson was 23, loud, electric, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became the room's organizing principle without trying or particularly noticing. Ronan was 29, already decorated, already quiet, already shaped by things he didn't discuss. They had nothing obvious in common. They became inseparable within 6 weeks and had been inseparable until the phone call 5 days ago. The one that told Ronan that Jackson had run his bike off Route 9 in the rain and into a rock face at approximately 11:30 on a Thursday night, and that the fire had been significant. The fire had been significant. Ronan smoked his cigarette and thought about that phrase. The fire had been significant. That was how the reporting officer had put it, and Ronan had written it down in the small notebook he kept in his jacket's interior pocket because he wrote down things that nagged at him. The fire had been significant, meaning they were working from dental records, meaning the physical remains were limited, meaning the verification of identity was, structurally, dependent on records that could, in theory, be altered by someone with the right access and motivation. He finished the cigarette, flicked it onto the wet ground, started his bike. The engine came alive with that particular thunder that Jackson had always said sounded like the world deciding to keep going. Ronan sat with it for a moment, listening to it, and then he pulled out of the cemetery and rode toward town. Not toward the compound, not toward the wake being held at the Warden Saints main bar, but toward the address he'd written in his notebook, alongside the phrase, "Fire had been significant." He was going to look at the crash site. The crash site on Route 9 was marked by the standard protocol: cones, caution tape, a white paint outline on the road surface where investigators had documented the bike's final trajectory. The rock face was scorched. There was debris. There were the specific visual signatures of a high-velocity impact followed by a fuel-fed fire. Ronan spent 45 minutes there in the rain with a flashlight and his phone's camera. He found 4 things that didn't belong. First, the skid marks. They were too clean, too linear, too controlled for a genuine loss of traction accident at speed. A real loss of traction accident in wet conditions produced chaotic, overlapping, panic-correcting skid geometry. These marks were deliberate, like someone had applied the brakes in a single smooth deceleration to a near stop, and then, and this was the part that kept pulling his eyes back, the marks stopped approximately 8 feet from the rock face. Not at the rock face, 8 feet before it. Second, the impact debris field was concentrated in a tight arc that was geometrically consistent with a stationary or near-stationary object hitting the rock face, not with a high-velocity object. If you hit a rock face at the speed that the accident report suggested, the debris went everywhere. This debris had a pattern, a controlled pattern. Third, no helmet. The report noted that Jackson had not been wearing a helmet, which was unusual for several reasons. The most immediate being that Jackson Mercer had not ridden without a helmet since 2015, when he'd watched a friend survive a low-speed accident that nonetheless left that friend unable to recognize his own children. Jackson had been emphatic about helmets after that. Ronan had never once seen him mount a bike without one in 7 years. Fourth, a partial boot print in the mud approximately 30 feet from the impact site, behind a stand of scrub brush that flanked the road. Fresh, within the last 48 hours, which put it potentially within the window of the investigation, potentially not. Size 11 or 12, lug sole, heavy tread, not a cop's shoe and not a civilian sneaker, a work boot. The kind of boot a person wore when they expected to be on their feet for a long time doing things that required traction. Ronan photographed everything, got back on his bike, sat in the rain on the shoulder of Route 9 and smoked another cigarette and looked at the scorched rock face and thought about his best friend. If you were going to fake your own death, he thought, This is how you'd do it in this town. You'd know this road. You'd know the traffic patterns. You'd know that rain meant fewer witnesses and faster evidence degradation. You'd know that the Warden Saint's reputation would ensure the cops processed this as quickly and superficially as possible, because nobody in the Blackridge PD wanted to spend more time than absolutely necessary documenting the death of a known club member. He thought about Mila Mercer's hands flat on the casket. He thought, she has her father's eyes, and her father never said anything without having already decided it was true. He started the bike and rode. The Warden Saint's bar was called the Iron Gate, and it had been on the corner of Mercer Street and 4th. The street name was a coincidence that had eventually stopped feeling like one, for 19 years. It was a long, low building with blacked-out windows, a hand-painted sign above the door that had been repainted exactly twice in 2 decades, and a parking lot that could accommodate 30 bikes, and usually did. The interior was dark wood, darker booths, a bar that ran the full length of the back wall, and a jukebox that had been broken since 2019 but that nobody had removed because it had become, through sheer stubborn persistence, part of the furniture. The wake was running in full effect when Ronan arrived. He could hear the noise from the parking lot. Voices, glasses, the particular register of a group of people drinking in the specific key of grief that is louder than regular drinking and more carefully maintained. He sat on his bike for a moment and watched the entrance. Deacon Marsh's car was in the parking lot. So was a black SUV that didn't belong. Ronan marked the SUV, its plate, its position, the fact that it was parked at an angle that gave the driver a direct line of sight to the bar's front entrance and the parking lot, and went inside. The bar was full. Every member in the chapter, most of the associate members, a scattering of civilians who were connected to the club in various peripheral ways. Claire Mercer was in a booth near the back wall with Mila beside her, a half-drunk glass of water in front of Claire, and a plate of untouched food in front of Mila. Mila was drawing something on a napkin. Claire was looking at the wall. Ronan got a beer he didn't intend to drink, leaned against the bar, and scanned the room. Deacon Marsh was at a table with 3 senior members. Tank Oliveira, a man called Splice, who handled the club's legitimate accounting, and a newer member named Cord, who had come up through the chapter's Nashville affiliate 18 months ago. They were talking in the low, close manner of people conducting business, rather than the open, sloppy manner of people grieving. Deacon's phone was on the table, face up. Ronan watched Deacon's face. Deacon had been with the club for 12 years, had been Jackson's second for 4. He was compact, careful, a former security contractor who had worked overseas for a private firm in the early 2000s and had returned with the particular flat competence of someone who had operated in environments where mistakes had immediate and significant consequences. He was good at his job and good at being good at his job, meaning he was also good at appearing to be doing something other than what he was actually doing. Right now, he appeared to be grieving with his brothers. Ronan watched him until he was certain what he was actually doing was managing something. Then he set his untouched beer on the bar and crossed the room to Claire. "How are you doing?" he said. It wasn't really a question. They both understood that. "I'm here," Claire said, which was an honest answer. He looked at Mila. "What are you drawing?" Mila looked up at him with those amber eyes. She held up the napkin. It was a map. A rough but surprisingly precise map of what appeared to be a waterfront, with docks marked and a building blocked in at the eastern end with the letter X drawn next to it. "Where's that?" Ronan said. "Somewhere Daddy showed me," Mila said. She looked back at her drawing. "He said if anything ever happened, I should remember it." Ronan's pulse did something specific and controlled. He kept his face neutral. "When did he show you that?" 2 weeks ago. Mila's pencil moved. "He said it was important. He made me draw it 3 times until I had it right." She paused. "He seemed scared." Ronan looked at Claire. Claire's eyes were looking at something that was not in the room. "I need to borrow this," Ronan said, gesturing at the napkin. Mila handed it over without looking up. "I already memorized it," she said. "I have a good memory. Daddy said that was my superpower." Ronan folded the napkin into his jacket pocket. He straightened up and looked across the bar at Deacon Marsh, who was looking back at him with an expression of ordinary social attention. 2 men making eye contact at a wake. Nothing unusual about that. Except that Deacon held the look 2 seconds too long before glancing away. Ronan went back to the bar, asked the bartender, a Warden Saints associate named Mike, who had been pouring drinks at the Iron Gate for 8 years, for a coffee. Drank the coffee and thought. Jackson had been afraid 2 weeks ago. Jackson had drawn a map for his 8-year-old daughter and made her memorize it. Jackson had, according to what Ronan was increasingly, carefully, reluctantly beginning to believe, staged his own death. The question was not whether someone had wanted Jackson Mercer dead. In their world, that was never a surprising data point. The question was what Jackson had known or found that was significant enough to make disappearing seem like the safest option, not just for himself, but for a woman and a child. Because that was what the map meant. Jackson hadn't just hidden. Jackson had left a hidden trail encoded in a child's drawing, routed through the one person nobody would think to question, his 8-year-old daughter. Which meant Jackson had expected someone to come looking, which meant Jackson had expected, at least in some capacity, that not everyone around him could be trusted with whatever he'd found. Ronan finished his coffee and was setting down the mug when the bar's front door opened and a figure stepped in from the rain. The room didn't go silent. It wasn't that dramatic. But there was a particular shift in the room's quality, the way a crowded space shifts when something enters it that doesn't belong. A current of attention, subtle, passing from face to face. The man in the doorway was young, mid to late 20s, lean, soaked through, wearing a jacket that was not a Warden Saints jacket, was not any club jacket Ronan recognized. He had Jackson Mercer's jawline. He had Jackson Mercer's way of standing, that particular balance, weight distributed in a specific way. Feet shoulder-width apart, the posture of someone accustomed to being in spaces where he might need to move quickly. He looked around the room until he found Ronan. He walked directly to him. "You're Graves," the young man said. "Yeah." Ronan looked at him. "And you're dead." Because he knew this face too, though he hadn't seen it in 7 years. Elias Mercer, Jackson's younger brother, who had died, supposedly, in a construction accident in 2019, whose death Ronan had always accepted because Jackson had, because there had been a service and a burial, and because in their world people died in various ways, and you processed it and kept moving. Elias Mercer stood in front of him, alive, soaking wet, and said, "I need to talk to you somewhere private, tonight." Ronan looked at him for a long moment. Then he glanced across the room at Deacon Marsh, who had gone very still in his chair in the way a person went still when they were working hard on appearing not to notice something. "Finish your drink," Ronan said. "Go out the back. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Elias nodded. He took a beer from the bar without acknowledging the bartender's stare and moved toward the back of the room. When he passed Claire Mercer's booth, he paused. Claire looked up and made a small, fractured sound, not quite a word, not quite a gasp, and grabbed his hand. Mila looked up at her uncle and said, with the absolute certainty that was apparently her default mode, "I knew he'd come." Ronan watched Deacon Marsh pull out his phone and send a text. He had about 4 minutes before whatever that text set in motion arrived. He made his way to the back door. The alley behind the iron gate was narrow, wet, lit by a single bulb above the fire exit. Elias was already there, jacket pulled tight, rain still coming. Up close he looked. Not good. He looked like someone who had been awake for a long time under difficult conditions, had recently traveled a significant distance, and was carrying something heavy enough that it showed in the set of his shoulders. "How long?" Ronan said. "Since Tuesday," Elias said. "I drove from Louisville. I saw the news about Jax, and I came." "Louisville. I've been there 3 years, different name, different work. He paused, looked at the ground. "I was supposed to stay gone. Jax made me swear." "Why?" Elias looked at him. "Because of what he found." "What did he find?" Elias rubbed the rain off his face with the back of his hand. "You know about the docks? The operation at the river?" Ronan thought about the map on the napkin in his jacket pocket. "Tell me what you know." "Jax called me 4 months ago. First contact in 3 years. He said he'd been pulling threads. Something was moving through the club. Not the whole club, not most of the members, but a piece of it, connected to the docks on the South River Road. He said there were people, Ronan. Elias's voice dropped. Not product, not guns. People, women, and kids. He looked up. He said it had been going on for 2 years minimum. He said someone inside was facilitating it. Someone with enough standing to run interference with police, with Port Authority, with whoever else needed to be managed. The back door opened. Ronan's hand went to the Glock at his waist before he registered that it was Mike the bartender, sticking his head out. Deacon just got up, Mike said. Him and Cord. They went out the front. Okay, Ronan said. Lock the front. Don't let anyone else in tonight. Tell them the wake's wrapped up. Family only. Mike looked at Elias, looked at Ronan, nodded, and went back inside. Ronan looked at the alley exit. He could hear, distantly at the edge of perception, the sound of a vehicle moving slowly on the street at the alley's far end. Not a sound that meant anything on its own, a sound that meant something in context. Is there a car? He said. I've got a truck 2 blocks over, Elias said. We're not going to it tonight. Whoever's in that SUV out front has been sitting there since before you walked in. You're not a coincidence they're going to ignore. Ronan thought for a moment. Claire and Mila, they can't go home tonight. I know. There's a place on the county road, old rental property. Club owns it, but it's not in the club's name. I'll get them there. He looked at Elias. You're going to tell me everything, all of it. What Jack's found, what evidence exists, who's involved, everything. Elias nodded. He looked like a man who had been carrying something alone for too long and was experiencing the specific exhausted relief of finally having someone to hand it to. He's alive, Ronan. Elias's voice was very quiet now. I don't know where. I don't know how long he can stay hidden, but he staged it. The crash, the fire, all of it, because he was out of options. They'd already threatened Claire. They threatened Mila. He stopped. He chose to die on paper so they'd stop looking at his family. But then Mila, she drew the map, Ronan said. Elias stared at him. You already knew? I've known something was wrong since the cemetery. Ronan zipped his jacket against the rain. Mila drew the map tonight, which means Jackson didn't account for his daughter knowing him well enough to leave a trail. Something in Elias's expression shifted, a complicated mixture of grief and recognition, and something that might, under other circumstances, have been close to pride. He always said she was the smartest person in the family. He was right. Ronan moved toward the door. Wait here 3 minutes, then come in through the kitchen and find a quiet corner. Don't talk to anyone. Don't look at anyone. Just wait. He went back inside. Claire Mercer was still in the booth. The food in front of Mila was still untouched. Ronan slid in across from them and kept his voice below the room's ambient noise level. I need you to listen to me carefully, he said. Claire looked at him. Her eyes were exhausted and clear in the specific way that grief and adrenaline combine to produce clarity. You can't go home tonight, Ronan said. Claire's jaw tightened. Ronan, I know what I'm asking. I know what this sounds like. He looked at her steadily. Claire, Mila said Jackson was scared 2 weeks ago, and tonight there's a vehicle outside this bar that has no reason to be here, and Deacon Marsh sent a text 30 seconds after Elias walked through the door. Claire went very still. Elias is here, she said. He's here. She closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, they were different. Not harder exactly, but more resolved. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, the county road property. Ronan looked at Mila. Hey. Mila looked up from her napkin. She'd drawn a new map. This one was more detailed than the first. The same waterfront location, but with notations in her precise, careful 8-year-old handwriting. Compass directions, distance markers. You have more of these, he said. Daddy showed me a lot of things, Mila said. She looked at him with those amber eyes that were so completely her father's eyes that it cost Ronan something every time she did it. He said you were the only one I should give them to. Jackson said that? He said if something happened and if it felt wrong, find Ronan Graves and give him everything I remember. She held up the new napkin map. I have a very good memory, Mr. Graves. I told you. Ronan took the map. He looked at Mila Mercer, 8 years old, unafraid, systematic, carrying the coordinates of a conspiracy in her head and drawing them out one napkin at a time. And he felt something shift in him. Not sentimentality. Something more structural than that. The feeling of understanding, finally and completely, what something was actually about. This wasn't about Jackson Mercer. Jackson had made it not about Jackson Mercer when he'd walked away from his own funeral. This was about the child in this booth, who had her father's eyes and her father's certainty, and who was, as of this moment, the most dangerous witness to the worst thing Ronan had ever been peripheral to in this town. "Pack a bag," he said to Claire. "One bag, 30 minutes. Don't go home. Is there anything at your house you absolutely need?" "My laptop," Claire said. "And the box in the hall closet? Jackson's personal files." "Do you have a key to a car nobody in this room knows you have?" Claire paused. "My sister's car. She's in Phoenix. Her spare set is at my neighbor's." "Go to your neighbor's, get the key, take your sister's car, and meet me at the junction of County Road 7 and the old Miller Farm access road. You know where that is?" "Yes." 1 hour. He stood up. "Don't tell anyone you're leaving. Don't take your phone." Claire looked at him. "Ronan, what did they do to him?" He held her gaze. "I don't know everything yet," he said, which was true. "But I know it was deliberate, and I know he's not in that box." Claire nodded once, very slowly, in the manner of someone who had already half known something for days, and was only now allowing themselves to fully accept what they'd already half known. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Mila echoed, already folding her napkin maps into the small pocket of her coat. Ronan crossed the room to the bar and found Mike. "Find Shepard," he said. "Tell him I need him and 2 others in the back lot. Quiet, 10 minutes. Nobody else." Mike nodded. Ronan stood at the bar for a moment with his hand around the cold beer he'd ordered an hour ago and still hadn't touched. He looked at the room. These men he'd known for years, some of them for decades, men he'd ridden with and fought alongside and trusted with his life, in situations that would have ended most people. And he understood, with the particular cold clarity that came from reading rooms well, that he didn't know which of them were clean anymore. He left the beer on the bar. Outside, the black SUV was still in the parking lot. It had pulled slightly forward since the last time he'd looked, a small adjustment, 20 feet, enough to cover the far edge of the building where the alley exit led out. Ronan stood in the rain and looked at it. Then he pulled out his phone and called a number he hadn't called in 8 months. It rang twice. "Who is this?" said the voice on the other end. "Graves," he said. A long pause. Then, "You've got a lot of nerve calling me." "Harper," he said. "I need a suspended detective who still has one useful contact in the State Police Crime Lab. I need her tonight." Another pause. The sound of breathing, the sound of Harper Vance deciding something. "I'm going to want a real explanation," she said. "I'm going to give you one," Ronan said. "And when I do, you're not going to sleep for a week." He ended the call, got on his bike, looked one more time at the SUV, which did not move, which sat in the rain like a held breath, and then pulled out of the parking lot and rode into the wet dark of Blackridge. Behind him, somewhere in the town, in a direction he couldn't yet identify, a radio crackled. A voice said a single word, and a second black SUV turned onto the road that led toward Claire Mercer's house. She had 30 minutes. He had 30 minutes to make sure she used all of them. He pushed the throttle and the engine roared and he rode. The County Road property was an 8-room house that the Warden Saints held through a shell company, used occasionally for out-of-town members, never advertised, known to maybe 6 living members. Ronan arrived first, swept the house, confirmed it was clean, and was in the kitchen with the lights off when headlights came up the access road. Claire's sister's car. He watched it come to a stop, watched Claire and Mila get out, watched the way Claire moved, fast, careful, checking behind her, and felt the tight thing in his chest loosen by 1 degree. They came inside. Mila went immediately to the kitchen table, pulled out her coat pocket, and laid down 3 napkin maps in a row. "There's more," she said, "but I need paper." Ronan found a notepad in the kitchen drawer and put it in front of her. She started drawing without preamble, precise, careful, working from memory with the focused efficiency of a much older person. Claire stood behind her and watched her daughter's hand move across the paper and said nothing. Elias arrived 20 minutes later in a truck Ronan didn't recognize. He came inside and stopped when he saw Mila at the table. "Hey, Bug," he said very quietly. Mila looked up. "I knew you weren't dead either," she said. Then she went back to her maps. Elias sat down heavily in the chair nearest the door. He looked at the table. He looked at Mila. He looked at Ronan and said, "Jax left something. Beyond the maps. Evidence. A flash drive. Real evidence, documented. Years of it. He told me it existed, but I don't know where he hid it." "Mila," Ronan said. Mila did not look up from her drawing. "I don't know where it is," she said, "but I know where the instructions to find it are." She finished a detail on the map and looked up. "He put them in his letter to me, the one in the box." "What box?" Claire said. Mila looked at her mother. "The box in the hall closet," she said. "The one you just brought." Claire looked at Ronan. Ronan looked at the box sitting on the kitchen counter where Claire had set it when she walked in. An ordinary cardboard box, sealed with tape, unmarked. Mila pulled the notepad back toward herself and kept drawing. In the rain outside, a branch cracked. Not a wind sound. The wrong angle for wind. Ronan was at the window in 2 steps, and in the darkness beyond the glass, 100 yards down the access road, he could see the slow sweep of headlights moving without engine sound. A car rolling dark. He turned. "Get away from the windows," he said. Mila looked up from her maps. She looked at Ronan's face and then at the window, and she did not look afraid. She looked, already calculating, already 4 steps ahead of the situation, the way her father had always been. "They followed us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Not you," Ronan said. "The box." He looked at Claire. "Did you have your phone when you picked up the box?" Claire's face changed. She pulled her phone from her jacket pocket and looked at it. And then she looked at Ronan with the expression of someone who had just understood exactly what kind of mistake they'd made and how much it was going to cost them. Ronan took the phone from her. He crossed to the back door, opened it 2 inches, and dropped the phone into the mud outside. "We have maybe 4 minutes," he said. "Elias, back window. Mila, leave the maps. Just remember them. Claire, the box." The headlights outside had stopped moving. The car was parked somewhere in the dark beyond the tree line, which meant they weren't moving yet either, which meant they were waiting for something, backup, a signal, a certain window to open or close. 4 minutes. Maybe less. Possibly more. The only thing Ronan knew for certain was that somewhere in that cardboard box on the kitchen counter was the first piece of a trail that Jackson Mercer had built from inside his own death, and that whatever was parked in the dark outside had come here specifically to make sure that trail ended tonight. And Mila Mercer, 8 years old, napkin maps folded in her coat pocket, her father's eyes steady as still water, was sitting at the kitchen table looking at Ronan with an expression that said, "I know you're going to fix this. I know because my father told me to find you, and my father never got anything wrong." The problem with that, Ronan thought, was that Jackson Mercer had gotten one thing wrong. He'd underestimated exactly how quickly the people hunting him would pivot from hunting him to hunting his daughter once they understood what she was carrying in that extraordinary, meticulous, terrifying memory of hers. A sound came from the tree line. Not an animal. Not the wind. A boot on wet ground. Ronan turned off the kitchen light. The kitchen went dark, and the world outside went very, very quiet. Ronan pressed his back against the wall to the left of the window and held up 2 fingers toward Elias across the room. Elias was already moving, low, quiet, the particular economical movement of a man who had at some point in his life received training in how to cross a room without being seen from outside. He reached the back window, checked the angle, and held up 3 fingers in return. 3 contacts. Outside. Coming from 3 different directions. Claire had Mila against the interior wall between the kitchen and the hallway, her body between her daughter and the windows, one hand over Mila's mouth in a gesture that was less about silencing her and more about channeling her own terror into something useful. Mila was not struggling. Mila was watching Ronan with focused, unblinking attention, waiting. Ronan did a fast inventory, 2 exits, front door and back door. 1 window on the east wall that looked out toward the woodshed. The black SUV from the bar had rolled in dark from the south, which put it on the access road. 3 contacts meant they'd come in from multiple directions, which meant they'd taken time to fan out, which meant they'd had enough warning to coordinate, which meant someone had called ahead with enough lead time to allow for tactical positioning. Deacon's text. He thought it through in the approximately 30 seconds he had available for thinking. 3 contacts, fanned out, rolling dark. They were trying to contain, not to storm. They wanted to confirm occupants before committing, which meant they weren't certain yet, which meant he still had a window. He crossed to Elias in 4 silent steps. "East side, toi," he said, voice below a whisper. "Woodshed. How far to the tree line from there?" 40 yards, maybe 45, Elias said. "Used to come out here with Jax when we were kids. There's a creek bed that runs north. If you follow it half a mile, it comes out at the Belcher property. Old man Belcher keeps 2 trucks in his barn." "You know Belcher?" "Jax used to buy parts off him." "Does Belcher know you?" Elias thought about this for a half second. "He knows a face. It's been 7 years." "Good enough." Ronan turned. He looked at Claire. He held up the box. She nodded. "Yes, take it." He tucked it under his left arm, and then he pulled the Glock from his hip and held it down at his side. Mila was looking at the gun. She didn't flinch. She just looked at it, and then looked back at Ronan, and he thought, not for the first time in the last hour, that this child was going to cost him something significant before this was over. He handed the gun to Elias. "Take them. East window. Woodshed first. Don't stop there. Straight to the tree line. Stay in the creek bed. Don't use your phone. You have it?" "Yeah." "Take the battery out when you're in the tree line. Whatever they use to track Claire's phone, assume it works on anything in this house." He pulled his own phone, removed the battery, set both pieces on the counter. "I'll pull them west. Give me 2 minutes, then move. Don't wait longer than 2 minutes." "What are you going to do?" Claire said. "I'm going to drive your sister's car out the front," Ronan said. "Directly at their position. They'll follow." "They'll—" Claire stopped. "They'll run you off the road." "They'll try to stop me. There's a difference." He looked at her. 2 minutes, Claire. Count them." He picked up Claire's car keys from the counter. He checked the front window. One of the exterior contacts was visible now, a shape at the edge of the tree line on the south side, standing very still. He counted. Waited. The shape didn't move. They were still in the confirmation phase. Good. He went out the front door fast and low, already moving toward the car, and he felt the shift in the darkness as the contact at the tree line registered movement. He got the car door open and the engine running and the headlights on before the contact had covered half the distance from the tree line, and then he reversed hard out of the short drive and hit the access road at speed, headlights sweeping across the darkness, and he saw the black SUV directly ahead of him, broadside across the road, its own lights coming on. He drove at it. Not fast enough to die, but fast enough that the decision they had to make, hold position and get hit or move, had to be made in less than 4 seconds. They moved. The SUV pulled forward off the road shoulder, and he went through the gap on the left side with 8 inches of clearance and the sound of gravel hammering the undercarriage. And then he was on the county road heading north, and the SUV was turning behind him. He drove for 3 minutes. Fast, but not reckless. He needed to keep them interested, not end up in a ditch. The SUV stayed with him, close but not ramming, which confirmed what he'd suspected. They wanted to contain, not destroy. Not yet. They wanted to know what he had. He had a cardboard box on the passenger seat and the growing certainty that the next 72 hours were going to redefine what he understood about the people he'd called brothers for 22 years. He drove. Harper Vance was waiting at the junction of Route 9 and County Road 12, leaning against a gray sedan that looked like it had been chosen specifically for its complete absence of memorable characteristics. She was 44, lean, with short dark hair, and the particular bearing of someone who had spent 15 years moving through high-pressure environments and had eventually stopped pretending it hadn't done something permanent to her nervous system. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a heavy jacket, But she stood the way cops stood even when they were trying not to. Weight forward, hands visible, checking the road in both directions with the unconscious rhythm of someone who had never entirely turned that habit off. She'd been suspended from the state police for 8 months. The official reason was conduct during a corruption investigation. The actual reason, the reason Ronan knew and Harper never discussed, was that she had gotten too close to something that connected to people with enough reach to make her investigation disappear and her career go sideways simultaneously. She had 3 citations for valor and a closed disciplinary file and no current badge, and she had not, as far as Ronan could tell, spent the last 8 months doing anything other than staying extremely quiet and waiting. She watched him pull over. She watched the road behind him. The SUV had dropped off 2 miles back. Either they'd lost him in the county roads meandering, or they'd made a decision to regroup. Either way, he'd bought time. "You lost a tail," Harper said. "For now." He got out of the car. He was moving carefully. The adrenaline crash was starting. The particular bone-deep fatigue that followed sustained alertness. He breathed through it. They had eyes on this county road property. I don't know if Claire and Elias got out clean. "Elias Mercer," Harper said. "Alive. Has been for 3 years." She processed this with the controlled expression of someone who had learned to compartmentalize surprise. "Jackson? Also, I believe, alive. I don't know where. I don't know how long he can maintain position." He picked up the box from the passenger seat. "This was in Jackson's house. Mila told us about it. She said there's a letter inside. Instructions to a flash drive. Evidence of a trafficking and weapons operation running through the South Docks." Harper looked at the box. She looked at Ronan. "You have an 8-year-old as your primary intelligence source." "I have the most reliable intelligence source I've ever encountered," Ronan said. "The fact that she's 8 is incidental." Harper almost smiled. "It didn't quite make it." "I don't have a badge, Ronan." "I know. Anything we find, anything you open, it's not going to be admissible if it's—" "I know." He looked at her steadily. "This isn't about admissibility tonight. Tonight it's about staying alive long enough to get what Jackson built into the hands of someone who can use it. The admissible part comes later." He held out the box. "Do you want to be involved or not?" She took the box. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere they're not looking." He thought for a moment. "The salvage yard on Route 44, old Denny Carson's place. He owes me a favor and he doesn't ask questions." "Does he have power?" "Generator, and a phone that's landline only, which is currently the only kind of phone I trust." She got in the gray sedan without further discussion. Ronan followed in Claire's sister's car. They drove in convoy through the wet dark of Black Ridge County, and Ronan kept watching his mirrors and thinking about Deacon Marsh's face in the bar, and the text he'd sent, and the particular way he'd watched Elias Mercer walk through the door with the controlled non-reaction of someone who had been pre-warned. He thought about 22 years of brotherhood and what it meant when you started calculating how much of it had been real. Denny Carson's salvage yard was 40 acres of compressed metal and reclaimed engines behind a 10-foot chain-link fence. And Denny himself was a 71-year-old former mechanic who had known Ronan for 15 years, asked nothing about his personal life, and had twice provided the Warden Saints with unregistered workspace for situations that did not need documentation. He opened the gate with the flashlight and horn signal Ronan used, let them through, and went back to his house without speaking. The office building at the yard's center had heat, a generator, fluorescent lights that buzzed at 40 hertz, and a table large enough to spread out what was in the box. Ronan and Harper worked in silence for the first several minutes. Ronan cutting the tape, Harper pulling items out and laying them in order while her mind organized them the way a detective's mind organized things even off the clock and without authorization. There were papers, financial records, printed, annotated in Jackson's handwriting. Photographs, dock facilities, containers, license plates, faces, a small notebook filled with dates, times, initials, and at the bottom, under a layer of folded maps that matched the ones Mila had been drawing, an envelope addressed in Jackson's handwriting to Ronan picked up the envelope. "That's for Mila," Harper said. "I know." He held it. "She told us it had instructions." Open it, Harper said. Not a suggestion. A cop's observation that the information inside was operationally relevant. He opened it. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, dense. The first 2 pages were personal, Jackson's voice unmistakably, talking to his daughter in the specific way a parent talked when they believed they might not have another chance. Ronan read those pages and kept his expression still, and felt something move through him that he had no language for and did not attempt to name. The 3rd page was different. It was a set of instructions, precise, numbered, operational. A storage unit on the east side of Blackridge, number 114, combination lock, 6-digit code that Jackson had encoded as Mila's birthday written backwards. Inside the storage unit, a waterproof case. Inside the case, the drive. And a second item. If Ronan has the drive, the letter said, tell him to call the number on the back of the photograph in the red envelope. Tell him the name is Whitaker. Tell him I already made contact 6 months ago, and Whitaker is waiting. Tell him I'm sorry I didn't tell him sooner. Tell him I was protecting him the only way I knew how. Ronan turned the box over. There was a red envelope taped to the bottom. Taped well, taped the way a man taped something he wanted to survive being moved around. He peeled it off. Inside was a photograph of the South Docks. Aerial view, annotated, and on the back, a 10-digit phone number. And a name. Whitaker. Harper was reading over his shoulder. That's a federal contact, she said. Yeah. Jackson was working with federal law enforcement. For 6 months. Without telling anyone. Ronan set the photograph down. He sat back and looked at the ceiling, the buzzing fluorescence, the shadows beyond them. He didn't tell me. There was a silence. Harper did not fill it. She understood the specific weight of that particular silence. He was protecting you, she said finally. I know why he did it. Ronan looked at his hands. Doesn't change what it means. What it meant was that Jackson had known 6 months ago that someone in the club was connected to the operation. Had known that the circle of trust had a leak inside it. Had made a calculation, protect the people closest to him by keeping them out of the information loop, and had been wrong about one thing only. He'd been wrong about how quickly they'd move. He'd been wrong about the timeline, and because he'd been wrong about the timeline, he'd had to disappear before he'd gotten the evidence to Whitaker, which meant Whitaker had been waiting for 6 months with no contact, no delivery, and no knowledge of whether Jackson Mercer was alive or dead. Until now. Ronan's phone, the replacement he'd bought at the all-night gas station 2 miles from the salvage yard on the way in, was a prepaid flip phone with no data and no history. He dialed the number on the back of the photograph. It rang 4 times. Whitaker, said the voice on the other end. It was a woman's voice, controlled, careful, the particular cadence of someone who answered unknown numbers in the middle of the night with professional neutrality. My name is Graves, Ronan said. Ronan Graves. I'm a member of the Warden Saints Motorcycle Club in Blackridge. I'm calling about Jackson Mercer. A pause. Very short. How did you get this number? He left it for me, in a letter to his daughter. He said he'd already made contact with you and that you were waiting. Another pause. Longer. Is he alive? I believe so. I haven't confirmed directly. Ronan looked at the photograph. I have the location of the evidence drive. I have his full documentation, physical copies of what's in the box he was building. And I have a flash drive location that I need to retrieve in the next few hours before whoever's been running surveillance on his family figures out what we're doing. What kind of surveillance? At minimum 2 vehicles, coordinated, multiple contacts, inside knowledge of safe house locations. He paused. It's inside the club. At least partially. Whitaker was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant processing, not hesitation. I'm in Archer Falls, she said. That's 40 minutes from Blackridge. I know where Archer Falls is. I can be at your location in 40 minutes if you give me an address. Not the current location, Ronan said. He thought. There's a diner on Route 9 called Lena's. It's been closed for 2 years, but the back parking lot has no cameras and one entrance. Can you get there without anyone tracking your movement? Yes. 40 minutes, he said. Come alone. He ended the call. Harper was looking at him. Federal, she said again. Yeah. Ronan. Harper sat forward, elbows on the table. If Jackson had a federal contact, if this operation is as significant as what's in that box suggests, this is beyond a club problem. This is beyond Blackridge. The people running this don't just have someone inside the Warden Saints. They have reach. I know. They'll have reach into law enforcement, maybe local, maybe higher. I know. He looked at her. That's why I called you and not anyone with a badge. She absorbed that. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere outside in the salvage yard, something shifted, metal settling, the cold making it contract. And both of them went still for exactly 2 seconds before identifying the sound and releasing it. I need to know if Claire and Elias got out, Ronan said. Can you reach them without a cell signal? Shepard, he said. He was at the bar. He's the only one in the club right now I'd trust with a phone call. He paused. Maybe. That's not a strong maybe. No, he said. It's not. Shepard answered on the first ring. He was 57 years old, heavy-set, with a beard that had been gray for a decade and eyes that had been watching the world from behind a careful, calibrated stillness for longer than that. He had been with the Warden Saints for 23 years, was the club's longest-serving member after Ronan, and had the distinction of never having been directly involved in anything that had gotten anyone killed, which in their world was a kind of moral achievement that most people overlooked because it was also simply a matter of being careful and paying attention. Shepard picked up, said, Was wondering when you'd call. Where are you? Parking lot of the Iron Gate. I'm looking at 2 black SUVs that came back about 20 minutes ago without you in front of them. A pause, the sound of a lighter. Deacon's inside. He's been on the phone since he got back. Claire and Mila. Did they get out? Saw Claire's sister's car leave about an hour before all this. Didn't see who was in it. Another pause. There's something else. Ronan waited. Cord left the bar right after you. Not with Deacon. Separate. He took Route 7 south. Route 7 south ran toward the county road property. How many minutes after I left? Maybe 8. 8 minutes. If Cord had driven direct at speed, he would have arrived at the county road property approximately 2 to 3 minutes after Elias and Claire needed to have been in the tree line. Whether that was enough margin depended on how long it had taken them to get out through the east window. He didn't know. He couldn't know without making a call that might expose Elias's location if Elias's new phone was already compromised. Shepard, he said, I need you to drive north. Route 44 toward the salvage yard. Denny Carson's. Don't bring anyone and don't tell anyone where you're going. I'm retired, Shepard said. The word retired in Shepard's vocabulary meant not that he had stopped being part of the club, but that he had, at some negotiated point, stopped being involved in the operational aspects of things that could put him in a box. You know that. I know, Ronan said. I'm asking anyway. A long pause. The sound of Shepard smoking. The distant sound of motorcycles from somewhere. Members arriving or leaving the bar, the night's social machinery still grinding even while its foundations were being pulled apart. This is about Jax, Shepard said. Yes. Another pause. He's not in that box. It wasn't a question. Ronan realized that Shepard had known, or suspected, longer than he had. The old man had been quiet about it, had been watching. No, Ronan said. He's not. All right, Shepard said. He sounded tired. Not surprised. Tired. The way a person sounded when something they'd been dreading for a long time had finally arrived and they were relieved, in a bleak way, to stop dreading it. I'll be there in 20, Shaz. The confrontation happened in the parking lot of the Iron Gate before Shepard could leave it. Ronan found out about it from Harper, who found out from a scanner frequency she still monitored out of habit on the radio in her sedan, which picked up a fragment of a Blackridge PD dispatch call at 11:40 that referenced a disturbance at the Iron Gate bar on Mercer Street. No units dispatched, filed, and closed in under 2 minutes, which was itself a data point. Blackridge PD did not file and close a disturbance call at a known motorcycle club location in under 2 minutes, unless someone had called it in and then immediately called it back. which meant someone was managing the police response. By the time Ronan and Harper reached the edge of the Iron Gates block, not in the parking lot, half a block up, headlights off, it was over. Whatever had happened fast. There were 3 members outside, one of them being helped to the wall of the building by 2 others. Tank Oliveira, huge and steady as a load-bearing column, was standing in the parking lot with his arms at his sides and his hands open, which was how Tank communicated, "I am choosing not to kill you right now." Deacon Marsh was talking to him. From 50 yards, in the dark, with rain between them, Ronan could not hear the conversation. He could read Deacon's body language. Controlled, precise, the particular posture of a man delivering an ultimatum he believed he had the leverage to back up. Tank listening with his hands open and his jaw tight. "What do you see?" Harper said quietly. "Deacon asserting authority," Ronan said, "which means he thinks the situation is contained, which means he thinks we're either neutralized or predictable. He watched. He doesn't know about the box yet. If he did, he wouldn't be standing in an open parking lot. He'll know soon." "Yes." They watched for another 60 seconds. Deacon finished talking. Tank did not respond verbally, just stood there until Deacon turned and went back inside, then turned to the wall of the building and pressed both fists against it and stood with his head down for a moment. "He's not with Deacon," Harper said. "No." "Can you reach him?" "Not without walking into the parking lot." Ronan thought. "Not tonight. Tomorrow. Tomorrow may be too late." "I know," he said. He watched Tank push off the wall and go back inside with the 2 members who'd been helping the 3rd. "Everything in the next 12 hours is going to be about speed. We get the drive, we get it to Whitaker, we get Claire and Mila somewhere that isn't inside Deacon's radius of control. After that," he stopped. "After that what?" Harper said. He didn't answer. The what comes after was a problem he wasn't ready to state out loud yet, because stating it out loud would require acknowledging something he had been keeping in the background of his mind since the cemetery, something he had been letting himself approach slowly, because approaching it directly meant confronting the full scope of what this was. 22 years. That was what the after required him to acknowledge. 22 years of brotherhood, of men he had bled alongside and grieved alongside and trusted with his life and with the lives of people he loved. And somewhere inside that 22 years was a rot that had been growing long enough that Jackson Mercer, Jackson, who had been the club's organizing principal, its moral center, its loudest and most alive thing, had decided the only way to protect the people he loved from that rot was to be erased from the world. That was the full scope of it, and it cost Ronan something to look at it directly. He started the car and drove. Lena's diner on Route 9 had been closed since a kitchen fire 2 summers ago. The sign was still lit, a habit of the building, some timer inside still cycling, and the parking lot was empty and dark and exactly as Ronan had described it. One entrance, no cameras. The building sitting between 2 empty lots that gave sightlines in all 4 compass directions to anyone paying attention. Whitaker was already there. She was a woman in her mid-40s, gray-brown hair pulled back, wearing a dark jacket over what appeared to be civilian clothes, but which sat on her body in the specific way that professional clothes sat on people who wore them for work, that required movement and didn't preclude physical confrontation. She was leaning against a dark government-plated sedan, arms crossed, watching them pull in with the evaluating neutrality of someone who had spent a career in rooms with people who might be dangerous and had reached a settled peace with that occupational reality. She looked at Ronan. She looked at Harper. "Graves," she said. "And you are?" "Harper Vance," Harper said. "Former state police. Currently," she paused, "consulting." Whitaker absorbed this. "Former. Suspended," Harper said. "No editorializing, just the fact." Whitaker looked at Ronan. "Tell me what you have." He told her. All of it, from the cemetery to the tire marks on Route 9, to the crash site anomalies, to Mila's maps, to the box, to the letter and the storage unit and the drive's location. He told it in order, without embellishment, the way he'd been trained to deliver intelligence reports. Specific, chronological, observation separated from inference. It took 11 minutes. Whitaker listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and smelled of wet asphalt and the distant river. "The drive is in storage unit 114, she said, if the letter was accurate. "The letter was Jackson," Whitaker said. "The letter was accurate." She looked at the dark diner. "We've been building this case for 8 months. Jackson made initial contact before I'd even begun. He'd been collecting documentation for over a year before he reached out. What's on that drive is the foundation of a federal prosecution of a trafficking and weapons network that is currently operating through 6 states and generating approximately $40 million annually." She paused. "The Black Ridge docks are the primary transit point. The operation is not run by the Warden's Saints. The Saints are being used. A faction inside the club provides protection and logistics facilitation and takes a percentage. The principal operators are external, organized, funded, connected at levels that have required us to be extremely careful about who inside federal law enforcement has been read in." "How many people know about this operation?" Ronan said. "On my side? 4. On the Black Ridge side. Local law enforcement is compromised. We assessed that within the first 60 days. She looked at him. "The club contact, your Deacon Marsh, has been a knowing participant for approximately 18 months. He recruited 2 others. Cord Navarro is one of them." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Who's the third?" "We don't have a confirmed identity on the third." She held his gaze. "Which is why Jackson couldn't trust a clean path to get the drive out. He didn't know who else was inside. We were working toward a confirmation when the timeline accelerated." "What accelerated the timeline?" Harper said. Whitaker looked at her. "Jackson got too close. He attended a meeting. He was trying to document a direct transaction. Someone in the room recognized that he was there in a capacity beyond what his cover story supported. Within 48 hours, he was receiving threats. Within a week, the threats had escalated to include Claire and Mila." She paused. "He made the decision to stage his death without consulting me. He believed, correctly, I think, that once he disappeared, they'd pull back from the family and focus on locating him." "Except they didn't fully pull back," Ronan said. "They had surveillance on the county road property tonight." "Because of Mila," Whitaker said. "She's a variable they didn't account for. Jackson didn't know what he'd left her. The maps, the letter. He'd compartmentalized it so completely that even he didn't know whether she'd access it without him there to prompt her." She paused. "They're not sure what she knows, which makes her a liability to them," Harper finished. "Yes." The cold settled around them. Somewhere on Route 9, a truck passed in the far distance. Headlights sweeping across the sky, engine sound fading into the dark. Ronan thought about Mila Mercer drawing maps on napkins at the kitchen table, about the steady, unafraid way she'd looked at him, about Jackson's letter, the parts he hadn't read aloud, hadn't shared, had folded back and put in his pocket because those parts were for him and not for the operational situation, were for the moment later when he had somewhere private to sit with them. "I knew you'd come," the letter said. "I knew if anything happened, you'd be the one to come. You always were. I should have trusted you sooner and I didn't, and I'm sorry. There's something I need you to know." The third contact inside the club. "I got close to an identification, but I wasn't certain. The profile is someone who's been with us long enough that their loyalty was assumed. Someone who's been careful enough that there's no paper trail. Watch the people who seem the least suspicious, Ronan. In my experience, that's always where it's hiding." He hadn't told Harper that part. He hadn't told Whitaker. He was looking at Shepard. In the back of his mind, in the place where he kept the things he was not ready to confront yet, he was running the calculation. Shepard. 23 years. Never implicated in anything, always careful, always watching, always knowing slightly more than he appeared to know about things happening in the club. It could be innocent. 23 years of careful, watchful seniority didn't make a man a traitor. It just made him a careful, watchful senior member. Except Shepard had known about the county road property. Most of the club hadn't. It was off book, held through a shell company. But Shepard had been with the club when the property was acquired. He had the institutional memory, and Cord had gotten to Route 78 minutes after Ronan left the bar. Cord was Deacon's. But Cord had not been at the bar when Ronan told Claire about the county road property. Cord had been at the table with Deacon, across the room, out of earshot. The only person who had been close enough to hear Ronan tell Claire where to go, the only senior member who had been in the booth's immediate vicinity, was Shepard, who had been sitting 2 booths over with a glass of whiskey and his eyes on the room. Ronan felt the thought arrive and let it sit. He did not move. He kept his face exactly as it had been for the last 11 minutes. Controlled, neutral, operational. His phone buzzed. Prepaid flip phone. One contact had the number, Shepard. He looked at the screen. The text read, "I'm at the salvage yard. You said to come. Where are you?" He had told Shepard to come to the salvage yard. He had not told Shepard where he was going after. Shepard couldn't know he was at Lena's, except there was a second possibility, that Shepard had arrived at the salvage yard, found it empty, and was genuinely waiting as instructed. That the text was innocent. That the question was exactly what it appeared to be. Ronan stood in the parking lot of the closed diner and held the phone and looked at the text and felt the full weight of not knowing settle into him like something physical, like a second skeleton inside his own. "What is it?" Harper said. "I need to make a decision," he said. "About what?" He looked at the phone. He thought about Shepard pressing his fist to the brick wall of the iron gate. About Shepard on the phone saying he's not in that box. And the specific weight of that statement, the resigned, exhausted weight of it. The way it had sounded like a man who had been carrying a truth too long and had finally decided to put it down. He texted back, "Stay there, I'm coming to you." He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Whitaker. "The storage unit, can you move on it tonight?" "I can have 2 agents in Blackridge in 90 minutes. "Too long." He looked at her. "I know where the unit is. I can have the drive in 20 minutes. "That's not procedure." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He looked at her steadily. "Jackson built this case from inside for 2 years. He chose to trust me with the final piece. I need you to trust me for 20 minutes. Whitaker looked at him for a long moment. She was reading him. He could feel it, the particular calibrated assessment of a trained investigator evaluating a source in real time. He let her read him. He didn't help or hinder. He just let her see what was there. 20 minutes, she said. Harper stays with me. You go. You call the moment you have it. He nodded. He got in the car. He was pulling out of the parking lot when his phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen, expecting another text from Shepard. It was a number he didn't recognize. He picked up. Ronan. The voice was rough, low, filtered through what sounded like road noise and bad signal. The voice of someone calling from a moving vehicle, calling from a phone that was not their regular phone, calling with the particular hoarseness of a man who hadn't slept in days and had been living in the kind of conditions that stripped the softness from a voice. But he knew it. He knew it the way you knew certain sounds. The sound of a specific engine, the sound of a specific laugh, the sound of a voice you had heard in the dark on the worst nights of your life and had come to associate with the fact that you were still alive to hear it. Jax, he said. Silence on the line. Then, I heard about the county roadhouse. We got out. I know, I've been... A pause, the sound of wind. I've been watching. Where are you? Doesn't matter right now. Ronan. Jackson's voice dropped. The third person, the one inside the club beyond Deacon and Cord. I know who it is. I've been trying to get confirmation for 6 months, and I finally have it. Ronan stopped the car. He was on Route 9, alone in the dark, and he stopped the car on the shoulder and held the phone and breathed. Tell me, he said. The pause before Jackson answered was 3 seconds long. In the context of everything, the funeral, the box, the letter, the tire marks, the boot print, the napkin maps, the 8-year-old girl with her father's eyes, and her father's certainty. 3 seconds was long enough to mean the name was someone Ronan knew well. Someone whose name would cost something to hear. It's Shepard, Jackson said. It's been Shepard for 14 months. He's the one who called Cord about the county road property. He's the one who gave them the location. Ronan looked out the windshield at the wet, empty road and the dark fields on either side and the sky that was just beginning, barely at the horizon's edge, to lighten toward the gray that preceded dawn. He thought about Shepard pressing his fist to the brick wall. He thought about, "He's not in that box," and how it had sounded like the resigned exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a truth too long. He thought about the text that was sitting in his prepaid phone. "Stay there, coming to you." He had told Shepard to stay at the salvage yard, and Shepard, who had been feeding their location to Deacon's network for 14 months, was sitting in Denny Carson's salvage yard waiting for Ronan to arrive, with the box, with everything. Because Shepard didn't know yet about the storage unit. Shepard didn't know about Whitaker. Shepard didn't know that the drive was one location away from federal hands, that the 8-month case was 20 minutes from closing, that the thing that had to be stopped from getting worse could be stopped from getting worse if Ronan drove to that storage unit right now and did not stop to confront the man in Denny Carson's yard. Ronan sat on the shoulder of Route 9 with his best friend's voice in his ear and the cold gray of pre-dawn on the horizon, and understood, with the full clarity of a man who had run out of margin, that there was no longer a version of this where he didn't lose something enormous. "Ronan," Jackson said, "are you there?" "Yeah," Ronan said. "I need you to go get that drive." "I know." "Don't go to Shepard, not yet. Not until you have the drive in Whitaker's hands. Can you do that?" Ronan looked at the road. 23 years. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." He put the car in gear and drove toward the storage units on the east side of Black Ridge as the first cold light began to separate the sky from the ground. And behind him, somewhere in the salvage yard, Shepard was waiting with the patience of a man who had learned to wait, who had made a career out of watching and waiting and knowing slightly more than he appeared to know, and who did not yet understand that the calculation had just changed completely, and the window he'd been managing for 14 months was closing with the first gray light of morning. The drive was 20 minutes away. Everything else was about to become irreversible. The storage facility on Black Ridge's east side was called Eastward Self-Storage, and it was the kind of place that existed in every mid-sized American town. A long row of orange roll-up doors under fluorescent security lights, a keypad entry gate, a small office that hadn't had a human being inside it after 6 in the evening for as long as anyone could remember. The kind of place where people put the things they couldn't throw away and couldn't look at. The kind of place that asked no questions and generated no attention. Ronan pulled in at 5:47 in the morning. The gate code was in Jackson's letter. 4 digits, standard facility entry. He punched it in and the gate rolled back and he drove through and parked 2 rows from Unit 114, facing out. Old habit. You always parked facing out. The facility was empty at this hour. Security camera on the front office, one on the far end of row A, neither of them covering row C where 114 sat. Jackson would have checked that before he rented it. Jackson checked everything. Ronan walked to 114. The combination lock was a standard 4-dial mechanism. He turned the dials to Mila's birthday written backwards. He'd worked it out in the car. And the lock opened on the first try. Inside, a single waterproof case, olive drab, military surplus, sitting in the middle of an otherwise empty unit like it had been placed there with ceremony. He picked it up. It weighed about 4 pounds. He opened it. The flash drive was in a Ziploc bag in the case's foam interior. Next to it, a folded piece of paper, a handwritten index of the drive's contents. Ronan unfolded it and read it in the security light spilling through the open door. 14 months of documented evidence, transaction records, photographs, GPS logs, recorded conversations, names, dates, routes, a complete operational map of a trafficking and weapons network that ran from Black Ridge's South Docks through 3 states and terminated at 2 distribution points he'd never heard of, but that Whitaker almost certainly had. And at the bottom of the index in Jackson's handwriting, Shepard, audio files 44 through 61. His voice, his words. 14 months. "I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry it took me this long to be sure." Ronan stood in the entrance of the storage unit with the drive in his hand and the index in his other hand and breathed. Just breathed. The cold air came in off the parking lot and smelled of asphalt and the far river and the particular emptiness of a town at 6 in the morning. His breath fogged. He watched it dissipate. He had known since Jackson's call. Hearing it confirmed in Jackson's handwriting cost something additional, something he hadn't anticipated. The specific grief of a written word, permanent and patient in a way that a phone call in the dark wasn't. Jackson had written, "I'm sorry" to him, which meant Jackson had understood what this would cost him, which meant Jackson had sat with that knowledge and written it anyway because Ronan deserved to know, and the truth was more important than protecting him from it. He closed the case, locked the unit, walked back to the car. He called Whitaker. "I have it," he said. "Location? Eastward Storage, East Black Ridge, Row C." "Stay there," she said. 10 minutes. She was there in 8. A dark sedan, no markings, 2 people inside. Whitaker and a man Ronan didn't recognize who had the specific compact competence of someone who worked in close protection or tactical field work. They pulled in alongside him, and Whitaker got out alone, and he handed her the case without ceremony. She opened it, looked at the drive, looked at the index. Her expression didn't change, but something in her stillness changed. A settling, a completing, the particular quality of someone who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has finally received it. "Audio files 44 through 61, Ronan said. She looked up at him. "Shepard," he said, "you'll find him on there. He's been waiting for me at the salvage yard for the last 40 minutes. Whitaker held his gaze. "We need to handle Shepard carefully. If he runs—" "He won't run," Ronan said. "He's waiting for me. He thinks I'm coming with the box." He paused. "I'm going to go meet him." "Graves, I'm going to go meet him," he said again, "and you're going to have someone in position before I get there. Because when I tell him—" He stopped, started again. "When it comes out, he's not going to run, but he may do something else." Whitaker studied him. "What do you need?" 30 minutes. And Harper. The kid. Harper was quiet in the passenger seat for the first 5 minutes of the drive to the salvage yard. That was one of the things Ronan had always respected about her. She understood that some silences were working silences and that filling them was a form of disrespect toward whatever was being worked through inside them. Then she said, "How long have you known him?" 23 years. She nodded, said nothing else. The salvage yard appeared out of the gray pre-dawn light. The fence, the compressed metal, the dark shapes of stacked cars and engine blocks receding into the distance behind the gate. The lights in the small office were on. Shepard's truck was parked outside. Ronan sat in the car for a moment. "You don't have to do this part," Harper said. "Yeah, I do," he said. He got out. Shepard was inside the office, sitting in the single chair behind Denny Carson's desk, a cup of coffee in one hand and his phone face down on the desk in front of him. He looked up when Ronan came in, and his expression was tired. Genuinely, profoundly tired. The kind of tired that had nothing to do with the hour. "You're late," Shepard said. "Had some things to handle," Ronan said. He pulled the other chair from the corner and sat down across the desk. Harper came in behind him and stayed near the door. Shepard looked at her, registered her, looked back at Ronan. "Detective Vance," Shepard said. "Formerly," Harper said. Shepard set down his coffee. He looked at Ronan, and in his eyes there was something that Ronan recognized and had not expected. Not guilt exactly, not fear exactly, but the look of a man who had been waiting for a specific conversation for a long time and was experiencing the dark relief of its arrival. "Where's the box?" Shepard said. "Safe," Ronan said. A pause. Shepard's jaw moved, a small, almost imperceptible tightening. "Ronan," he said. "Tell me how it started," Ronan said. His voice was flat, controlled. He was not going to shout. He was not going to put his hands on Shepard. He was going to sit in this chair and look at the man across the desk and ask the question and hear the answer, because he owed Jackson that, and he owed himself that, and maybe he owed Shepard that too, though the owed Shepard part was getting harder to locate. "That's not—" Shepard stopped, started over. His hands came up and pressed flat on the desk. "It's not what you think it is. Tell me what it is." Shepard looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the desk. Then he said in a voice that had dropped to barely above a whisper, "My daughter." Ronan went still. "My daughter," Shepard said again. "Emma. You never knew about her. I kept that part of my life separate. She's 24. She's been in trouble since she was 17. Addiction, bad situations, bad people. He paused. 2 years ago, she got pulled into something. The docks operation. Not voluntarily. She was used as leverage. His voice had lost its texture. It was coming out flat and precise now, the voice of someone reading from a damage report they had memorized. They told me they had her, that she was safe, that she'd stay safe as long as I did what they asked. Passed along information. Covered certain movements when they needed a senior member to vouch. He raised his eyes to Ronan's. I never touched a woman. I never touched a child. I passed information, location data, route timing, safe house access. He stopped. I told Cord about the county road property. The room was very quiet. The generator hummed. Harper had not moved from near the door. Emma, Ronan said. I haven't seen her in 8 months. They said she was fine. They said as long as He stopped again. His hands on the desk were not shaking, but they were pressing very hard into the surface. I don't know if she's still alive. Ronan looked at him. He looked at the face he had known for 23 years, the gray beard, the careful eyes, the expression that had always communicated watchful steadiness, and that now communicated something else entirely. A man who had been living inside an impossible calculation for 14 months and had run out of ways to make it come out right. He thought about Mila Mercer at the kitchen table, drawing maps on napkins with her small, precise hand. He thought about the women and children on those docks. He thought, there's always a daughter, there's always a child. That's how they do it. They find the thing you love most in the world, and they put their hand around it, and they squeeze, and then whatever you were before that moment is over. The audio files, Ronan said. Jackson recorded you. Shepard closed his eyes. I figured he might have. Toward the end. When he started changing, he opened his eyes. I knew he was building something. I didn't know how close he was. When they told me to pass along route information for the night he disappeared, I thought... His voice cracked. Just once, then steadied. I thought they were going to kill him. I thought I was helping them kill my best friend's brother. Were you? No, he staged it himself. I found that out later. Shepard looked at his hands. That's what I've been sitting with for 6 months, thinking I helped kill Jackson, living inside that. The door behind Harper opened. Not Harper, she hadn't moved. The door opened from outside, and the man who came through it was not Denny Carson, and was not one of Whitaker's people, because Whitaker's people were not supposed to be here yet. We're not supposed to make entry for another 20 minutes. And the man in the doorway was Cord Navarro, with a gun in his hand and the flat expression of someone executing a pre-planned action rather than reacting to a situation. Harper moved first. She was fast, faster than the situation should have allowed for, and she got her hand on Cord's gun arm as the shot went into the ceiling instead of into Shepard's head, which was where it had been aimed, and then Ronan was over the desk and the three of them were in the confined space behind the door, and it was ugly and close and loud for about 8 seconds. Cord was younger and stronger. Harper was trained in ways that partially compensated for both. Ronan was neither young nor moved by considerations of damage to himself, which in a confined physical confrontation was its own significant variable. Cord ended up on the floor with Harper's knee in his back and Ronan's hand on his neck and the gun 4 feet away. Shepard had not moved from his chair. Ronan looked up at him. You called him, Ronan said. Shepard's eyes were closed. When you texted me to stay here, I knew what it meant. I knew you were going somewhere else first. I knew you'd figured it out. He opened his eyes. I called Cord because if Cord came here, Deacon wouldn't send anyone else. I was trying to contain it to this room. You were trying to protect me, Ronan said. I was trying to protect everybody. Shepard's voice was very quiet. I've been trying to protect everybody for 14 months, and I've just been making it worse. Cord, face down on the floor, said nothing. He was breathing hard and his hands were zip-tied behind him with the flex cuffs Harper produced from her jacket pocket, and he had the expression of someone recalibrating their options and finding the current inventory unsatisfying. Ronan's phone rang. Whitaker. We have a problem, she said when he answered. My agent en route to your position is reporting a second vehicle following him. He's been burned. I'm pulling him back. A pause. Someone in Blackridge law enforcement has been monitoring federal frequencies. We flagged it 6 hours ago, but I didn't have confirmation until now, Ronan said. Yes, which means the window we thought we had is shorter than... The generator went out. Complete darkness. The fluorescent office light dead. The security light outside dead. Everything dead in the specific sudden way that indicated someone had cut the main power supply to the facility from outside. Not a circuit breaker. A cut. Ronan pressed against the wall. He heard Harper do the same. He could hear Cord on the floor breathing. He could hear from outside the distant, moving, closing, the sound of engines. Not motorcycle engines, vehicle engines, more than one. And then, underneath it, from a different direction, from the county roadside, the unmistakable low thunder of Harley-Davidson engines, multiple, moving in formation. Two different forces coming from two different directions converging on the salvage yard. Whitaker, he said into the phone. I hear it, she said. I'm 4 minutes out. Ronan, listen to me. There is something I didn't tell you earlier, something in Jackson's prior communications that I held back because I wasn't certain it was verified. Tell me now. The third operational node, she said, beyond the docks. We tracked two others. One is a warehouse on the South River Road. The other, she paused. The other is a property registered to a shell company. We traced the shell company 3 weeks ago. It registered to an individual using a false identity. Another pause. The identity traces back to a man named Curtis Dean. Curtis Dean served in the Marines from 1997 to 2005. His service record was clean. After 2005, he dropped off entirely. No tax filings, no address, no documented existence. She stopped. The biometric profile we pulled from the shell company registration matches a man who has been living in Blackridge under a different name for 15 years. Ronan stood in the dark with the engines getting louder from both directions and said, What name? The name he's been using in Blackridge, Whitaker said, is Jackson Mercer. The world stopped. Not metaphorically. Ronan's sensory processing literally paused for approximately 2 seconds, the way a system paused when it received input that contradicted its foundational architecture at too many points simultaneously to process normally. He stood in the dark and heard the engines and heard Whitaker's voice and heard, from some vast and echoing interior distance, the particular sound of 22 years of friendship reconstituting itself in a new and terrible shape. What are you telling me? He said. His voice came out completely flat. It had no affect in it at all, which meant his affect was somewhere else, somewhere offline, somewhere he'd deal with later if there was a later. I'm telling you, Whitaker said carefully, that the man you know as Jackson Mercer may not be who you believe he is. I'm telling you that Curtis Dean has a pre-Marines history we are still reconstructing. I'm telling you that the shell company connected to the warehouse, one of the principal transit nodes for the operation, is in his name. And I'm telling you that we do not yet know whether this means Jackson built the operation, infiltrated it, or something in between those two things that we don't have language for yet. Ronan thought about the phone call in the car, Jackson's voice, the specific hoarseness of it. I've been watching. I know about the county roadhouse. He thought, if you ran this operation, you would know about the county roadhouse. You would have built it into the architecture. You would have used it as a controlled location, a place you could monitor, a place you could send people you wanted to track. He thought about the letter. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was protecting you the only way I knew how. Protection. Or management. The words were not always different things. He thought about Mila, about Claire, about the specific anguish on Jackson's face in the letter's first 2 pages. The personal pages, the father pages, the pages that had cost Ronan something to read. He thought, you can love someone and be something terrible. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. He had seen that truth in enough places to know it was real. Does Mila know? He said. Know what? Any of it. Does she know who her father actually is? We don't believe so, Whitaker said. We believe she knows exactly what she appears to know. A loving father who was frightened and left her a trail. We believe that part is real. A pause. Ronan, the man on that phone call tonight, he gave you the drive location. He confirmed Shepard. He is actively working against the operation. Whatever his history is, his current action is toward exposure and termination of the network. We have to hold those two things at the same time. I know, he said. The engines outside were close now. The Harleys, coming from the county road, had stopped somewhere short of the facility entrance. The vehicle engines, coming from the east, were still moving, slower now, tactical. He could see headlights through the office's single window, moving in the pre-dawn dark. Shepard spoke from his chair in the darkness. How bad is it? Ronan looked at where Shepard's voice was coming from. Bad, he said. It's bad. Emma, Shepard said. Just the name. Not a question. A placement. The way you placed a thing you loved in the middle of a collapsing situation to remind yourself what the center was supposed to be. I know, Ronan said. Is she? I don't know yet. He moved to the window. Outside, two vehicles in the east approach, lights off now, parked 60 yards from the gate. And from the county roadside beyond the fence, the shapes of motorcycles in the gray dawn light. Not moving. Waiting. He counted the bikes. 7, 8. He knew those silhouettes. He had ridden alongside those silhouettes for years. Tank was out there. He could tell by the size of the shape on the lead bike, and two others he recognized by posture and bike configuration. They'd come. Somehow they'd known to come, or Shepard had called them to, or the Warden Saint's internal communications were more resilient than Deacon had accounted for. They were outside the fence in the gray light, engines idling, waiting. Ronan made a decision. He looked at Harper. Keep cord on the floor. Don't open the door for anyone until I come back. Where are you going? She said. To talk to my brothers, he said. The ones that are still mine. He went out the back door of the office, across the yard, through the gap in the fence that Denny Carson had installed 20 years ago as an emergency exit and had never patched because emergency exits were useful things to have. He came around the outside of the fence and walked toward the bikes in the gray dawn. Tank saw him coming and cut his engine. The others followed, one by one, until the engines were all silent and the dawn was quiet except for the distant sound of the vehicles on the east side and the river wind and Ronan's boots on the wet gravel. He stopped in front of Tank. Tank was 55, massive, with hands that looked like they'd been built for a larger species and eyes that were, in this moment, very clear and very serious. He looked at Ronan and said, "Tell us what's happening." "How did you know to come here?" Ronan said. "Shepard called me 2 hours ago. Said if I didn't hear from him by 5:30 to bring people to the salvage yard." Tank paused. He sounded like a man saying goodbye. Ronan looked at the 7 men in front of him. He knew all of them, knew their histories, their damage, their specific moral geography. These were not men who operated without calculation. They had each, at various points in their lives, made decisions that existed in the gray space between right and necessary. But they were not men who hurt the innocent. They were not men who facilitated what was happening on those docks. He knew that. He was choosing to continue knowing it. "The club has been compromised," he said. He didn't soften it. There was no soft version. Deacon, Cord, and Shepard. Shepard was coerced. That's different. But the result was the same. They've been feeding operational information to the people running the docks operation for over a year. Jackson found out. Jackson is alive. He watched their faces. He staged his death to protect Claire and Mila and to buy time to get evidence to federal law enforcement. The evidence is now in federal hands. What happens in the next few hours determines whether all of it was enough or whether the people who want it buried get the chance to bury it. Silence. 7 men in the gray dawn looking at him. Then one of them, a man named Vessel, who was 41 and had been with the Saints for 9 years, and who Ronan knew had a sister he sent money to every month, said, "What do you need?" That was it. That was the whole decision, made and stated in 5 words. "The vehicles on the east side," Ronan said. "I need them held, not engaged, held, long enough for Whitaker's people to arrive." He looked at Tank. "Can you do that without anyone dying?" "Depends on them," Tank said. "Make it not depend on them." Tank almost smiled. It had no warmth in it, but it had a kind of bleak recognition, the expression of a man being asked to do something that was going to require restraint, and who understood that restraint was sometimes the harder skill. "All right," he said. They moved. Not fast, not loud. The particular purposeful quiet of men who had learned that efficiency was better than aggression in most situations. They spread out along the fence line, taking positions, engines off, the gray dawn light catching the chrome of their bikes and the leather of their jackets and the set of their faces. Ronan went back through the gap in the fence. He was halfway across the salvage yard when his phone rang again. Not Whitaker, not Jackson, an unknown number with a Black Ridge area code. He answered. "Mr. Graves?" The voice was male, educated, with the particular flat authority of someone accustomed to giving instructions to people who followed them. "You've had a very productive night. I want to offer you an alternative to what you think happens next." "Who is this?" Ronan said. He kept walking. He noted the call. He continued moving. "My name isn't important. What's important is that the young woman in our care, Emma Caldwell, formerly Emma Shepard, is currently in good health and would prefer to remain that way. The flash drive you retrieved this morning is federal property now, which is unfortunate but not insurmountable. However, the physical documentation in the box from the Mercer house has not yet reached federal hands, and we would very much like it to remain that way." Ronan stopped walking. The box. He had given the box to Whitaker at the storage facility. Whitaker had it. It was in federal hands, except he hadn't confirmed that to this voice. This voice didn't know what he'd done with the box. This voice was operating on an assumption. "What are you proposing?" Ronan said. "A simple trade," the voice said. "The box, delivered to an address I'll provide in exchange for Emma Caldwell, returned alive and unharmed within 24 hours. A pause. "You have 10 minutes to decide. After 10 minutes, the offer expires and the variable changes." The line went dead. Ronan stood in the middle of Denny Carson's salvage yard in the gray morning light with compressed metal on all sides and the sound of the river in the distance, and understood with complete and terrible clarity exactly what had just happened. They had Emma. They had had Emma for 8 months. They had used Emma to control Shepard, and they were now, with their operation collapsing, using Emma as a last resort, as a final piece of leverage to recover something they could use to complicate the federal case, not destroy it. The drive was gone. But physical documentation in the box, in the wrong hands, could be used to identify informants, to warn remaining network nodes, to buy time for key operators to disappear before the federal action reached them. The box was already with Whitaker. Ronan couldn't trade it if he wanted to, which meant Emma Caldwell's life now depended entirely on whether federal agents could identify and reach her location in less than 10 minutes. He ran. Back to the office, through the back door, past Harper and the prone Cord and the sitting Shepard. Shepard, who looked up at him with the expression of a man receiving news he already knew was the worst kind, and he got Whitaker on the phone in 9 seconds and gave her the call, the voice, the area code, every detail. And Whitaker said, "I need you to buy me time." And Ronan said, "How much?" And Whitaker said, 20 minutes. And Ronan said, "I have 10. And Whitaker said, "Then you're going to have to lie to them." Ronan looked at Shepard. Shepard was looking at the floor. He looked at Harper. Harper was looking at him with the controlled, clear expression of someone who had run out of good options and was now working in the territory of least bad ones. He looked at Cord on the floor. Cord, who knew the operation. Cord, who had a phone in his pocket that connected to a network that connected to the man who had just called Ronan's number. Cord, who was the only person in this room with direct, immediate access to whoever was holding Emma Caldwell. Ronan crouched down next to Cord. "Here's what's going to happen," he said quietly. "You're going to make a call. You're going to tell whoever answers that I agreed to the trade. You're going to buy us 20 minutes. Cord looked up at him from the floor. His eyes were calculating, cold, doing the math. "And what do I get?" "You get to be the person who saved a girl's life," Ronan said, "which is not nothing. Depending on what the next year looks like for you, it might be the only thing." Cord was quiet. Outside, the vehicles on the east side had stopped moving. Tank had done something, taken a position, made a statement, communicated without words that forward motion was not currently available as an option. The dawn was fully arrived now, the sky lightening from gray to the flat pale blue of a cold morning. Somewhere a bird was making noise. "They'll know," Cord said. "When the 20 minutes pass—" "20 minutes is all we need," Ronan said. Cord looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past Ronan at Shepard. Some communication passed between them that Ronan couldn't fully read. Old alliance, old history, something that had existed before betrayal complicated it. Then Cord said, "Get my phone out of my left pocket." Ronan got it. The call lasted 4 minutes. Cord's voice was steady, controlled, convincing. He told whoever answered that Graves had agreed, that the box would be delivered, that they needed 30 minutes for logistics. He was given 20. He did not argue. He ended the call. 20 minutes, Cord said. Ronan was already dialing Whitaker. Shepard's hands were flat on the desk in the gray morning light, and his eyes were closed, and he was breathing. Deliberately, carefully, the breathing of a man keeping himself together by the single thread of a name. His daughter's name. A name that Ronan had not known until 45 minutes ago, and that was now the hinge point of everything. Emma. 20 minutes. The dawn sat cold and quiet over the salvage yard, and Ronan stood in the middle of it, with the phone at his ear and the full weight of everything he now knew, about Shepard, about Jackson, about the name Curtis Dean, and what it might mean and what it might not mean, and the terrible open space between those two possibilities, pressing down on him with the specific heaviness of truth that has not yet finished arriving. Whitaker picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you have something," Ronan said. And somewhere across town, in a building that was about to become very significant very quickly, a young woman named Emma Caldwell was sitting in the dark, not knowing that the 20 minutes her father had bought her with 14 months of impossible choices had just started counting down. Whitaker had 14 minutes. She used them. The address came through at minute 9, a warehouse on the South River Road. Third building past the old grain elevator, the one with the corrugated east wall and the loading dock that backed directly to the water. Ronan knew the building. Every warden saint knew the building. They had ridden past it 1,000 times without looking at it twice, which was, he understood now, entirely the point. He was moving before Whitaker finished the sentence. Tank and the 7 bikes outside the fence came alive the moment Ronan came through the gate at a run. No briefing. Tank read him the way men who had ridden together for years read each other. The particular body language of someone who had stopped calculating and started moving. And Tank said one word to the men behind him, and 8 engines answered at once, a sound like the earth deciding something. "River Road," Ronan said, getting on his bike. "Third building past the grain elevator. Emma Caldwell is inside." "How many?" Tank said. "Don't know." "Whitaker's people?" "Behind us. We don't wait." Tank's face said what his mouth didn't need to. He pulled out first, and Ronan fell in behind him, and the 8 of them hit the county road at speed. Headlights cutting the pale morning flat. Engines filling the dawn with a sound that rolled across the fields and reached the river before they did. 4 minutes. The warehouse appeared through the windbreak of dead winter trees, corrugated walls, 2 vehicles parked at the loading dock end, one light burning inside that threw a yellow strip under the main door. Ronan counted the vehicles. 2, which meant between 2 and 8 people inside, depending on configuration, depending on whether they'd consolidated after the salvage yard situation. He didn't know. He was going in without knowing. He had stopped caring about that approximately 6 minutes ago. Tank took the loading dock side with 3 bikes. Ronan took the main entrance with the other 4. They hit both simultaneously. Tank's group putting 2 bikes directly across the dock access to block vehicle exit. Ronan's group at the main door with the kind of focused, controlled momentum that communicated clearly that the people inside had one opportunity to make a decision that didn't end badly, and that opportunity was right now. The door opened before they reached it, not in surrender, in preparation. The man in the doorway had a weapon and had already made his decision, and the next 4 seconds were loud and close and brutal in the specific way of confined physical confrontations where everyone involved had previous experience with confined physical confrontations, and nobody was operating on hesitation. Ronan took the hit on his left side. Not a bullet, A solid strike with a weapon he didn't fully see, something heavy and swung hard, and his left arm went numb from elbow to wrist, and he used his right and kept moving because stopping was not an available option, and pain was information, and information could be processed later. Inside, fluorescent lights, half of them dead, concrete floor, the smell of river water and rust, and something chemical underneath. Two more men near the center of the space, a partition wall at the far end with a door, light under it. Tank's group came through the loading dock door at the same moment, and the arithmetic changed. It lasted, Ronan couldn't have said exactly. 40 seconds. A minute. Time in those situations did not behave like time in ordinary situations. It compressed and stretched simultaneously, each second containing its own enormous specific inventory of sensation and decision and consequence. When it was over, the two men near the center were on the floor, and the man from the doorway was against the wall with Vessel's forearm across his throat, and Ronan was at the partition door with his shoulder against the frame, and his right hand on the handle and his left arm still mostly numb, and his ribs telling him something he didn't want to hear about the quality of that hit. He opened the door. Emma Caldwell was in the far corner of a small room that smelled of cold concrete and old fear. She was 24 years old, and she was alive, and she was looking at him with the wide animal alertness of someone who had been in a room like this for long enough that her nervous system had stopped distinguishing between threats and rescuers. Her wrists were bound. She was thin in a way that said weeks, not days. "Emma," he said. He kept his voice level. "Your father sent me." Something in her face broke and reformed in a single movement, and she made a sound that was not a word, and Ronan crossed the room and cut the zip ties with the knife from his belt and said, "Can you walk?" And she said, "Yes," and the word came out ragged and certain at the same time. He got her to her feet. She was unsteady but functional. The particular functional despite everything quality of a person running on the last reserves of something they'd found somewhere deep in themselves. He put his right arm around her and got them both moving. In the main space, Tank had the situation contained. The three men on the floor, vehicle exits blocked. Vessel on the phone, Whitaker, presumably, telling her they had the girl, telling her to move. Ronan got Emma to the main door and into the pale cold morning, and she looked at the sky. The flat blue of full dawn, the river visible through the trees, the sound of water, and she breathed. Just breathed, like a person checking whether the world was still real. His phone rang. Jackson. He answered. "You got her," Jackson said. Not a question. "Yeah." A sound on the line that Ronan chose not to examine too closely. "Ronan, there's something else. The voice that called you. The man who offered the trade. I know who he is." "Tell me." "His name is Fallon. Raymond Fallon. He ran the network's oversight from the outside, never touched the docks directly, never appeared in any transaction record, insulated through 12 layers of shell and cutout. He's the reason the federal case hasn't been enough on its own. Without Fallon, the network reconstitutes inside 18 months. With him, it ends." A pause. "He's in Blackridge right now. When the salvage yard situation broke, he came in person. He doesn't do that. He did it because of me," Ronan said. "Because I have the box." "He thinks you have the box." Ronan stood outside the warehouse with Emma Caldwell's weight against his right side and his left arm still mostly not working and his ribs making their ongoing complaint, and thought about Raymond Fallon, who had stayed invisible for years behind 12 layers of protection, who had come to Blackridge in person for the first time because he believed there was a box of physical documentation that could put him specifically in a federal case that had so far been careful enough to stop short of him. "Where is he?" Ronan said. "Iron Gate," Jackson said. "He went to Deacon. He's been there for the last hour." The Iron Gate, the Warden Saint's bar, where this had started, where Elias had walked through the door and Ronan had watched Deacon send a text, and the whole architecture of the last 24 hours had begun its collapse. Raymond Fallon was sitting in the Warden Saint's bar, waiting for news about a box that was already in federal hands, having come out of hiding for the first time in years, having exposed himself because he believed there was still something to recover. Whitaker's vehicles were pulling into the river road now, 3 of them, moving fast. Ronan watched them come and felt the cold on his face and the weight of Emma against his side and heard, from somewhere inside the warehouse, Tank's voice giving clear, controlled instructions to people who were currently not in a position to disagree. "Jax," he said. "Yeah. I need you to tell me something." A pause. The road noise on Jackson's end. The sound of movement, of a man who had been living in motion for weeks. "Ask it," Jackson said. His voice had changed. It had the quality of a man who knew what question was coming and had been deciding, for some unmeasured duration, how to answer it. "Curtis Dean," Ronan said. The silence on the line was 10 seconds long. In 22 years of friendship, Ronan could not remember a silence that long. "I was going to tell you," Jackson said finally. "I need you to know that. I was going to tell you everything." "Tell me now." Another pause, shorter. "Not on the phone. I'm coming in. I've been 3 miles out for the last 2 hours. His voice dropped. "I need you to be there, Ronan, when I walk in. I need you to be the one I see first." Ronan looked at the dawn sky, at the river through the trees, at Emma Caldwell standing on her own now, unsteady but upright, looking at the arriving federal vehicles with an expression he recognized. The expression of a person watching something they'd stopped believing would happen actually happen. "Fallon," Ronan said. "I know where he is. Whitaker needs him. Alive, on record, documented." Ronan moved toward his bike. "The Iron Gate. You said the Iron Gate." "Yes." "Then that's where we're going." He looked at Tank, who had emerged from the warehouse and was reading the situation with his characteristic unhurried assessment. Ronan held up 3 fingers and pointed toward town. Tank nodded once and turned back to get the others. Ronan got on his bike. His left arm was coming back, pins and needles from elbow to wrist, the particular electrical discomfort of circulation returning to a limb that had been struck hard. He flexed it, functional. Painful, but functional. His ribs were going to be a problem later. Later was later. He kicked the engine over and it came alive under him. That sound, that specific thunder, the sound Jackson had always said sounded like the world deciding to keep going. And he sat with it for 1 second and felt the vibration move through the numbness in his arm and through the complaint in his ribs and through every layer of everything the last 24 hours had deposited in him. Then he pulled out and rode toward the Iron Gate, and the 8 bikes fell in behind him, and the sound of them together on the empty morning road was the loudest thing in Blackridge, the most alive thing. A sound that rolled ahead of them like a warning that something was coming that had run out of patience and run out of margin and had arrived at the final version of itself. Raymond Fallon was in the Warden Saints bar. Jackson Mercer, or whatever his name was, or whatever the truth was, or whatever the impossible layered thing between the man Ronan knew and the name Curtis Dean actually amounted to, was 3 miles out and coming in. And Mila Mercer, somewhere safe with her mother and her uncle, was waiting with her father's eyes and her father's certainty for the moment when the man who had drawn maps with her and made her memorize them and told her that Ronan Graves was the one to find, for the moment when that man came back from the dead and stood in front of her in the ordinary morning light and was real again. The Iron Gate appeared ahead, Deacon's car in the lot, one unfamiliar vehicle, dark, clean, expensive in the understated way of people who had money they didn't advertise. The bar's sign still burning in the pale morning, the neon buzzing against the daylight like it hadn't gotten the message that night was over. Ronan cut his engine 50 yards out. The others did the same. 8 bikes coasting silent into the parking lot of the Iron Gate in the cold morning. The only sound, the crunch of gravel and the distant river and the buzzing neon, and somewhere inside the building, 2 men who did not yet know that everything they had built and protected and insulated for years had already, quietly and completely and irreversibly, come apart. Ronan put down the kickstand. He sat on the bike for 1 moment and looked at the door. Then the door opened. And the man who walked out of it was not Deacon Marsh and was not Raymond Fallon, but was a man Ronan had buried 4 days ago, scarred along the jaw and thin from weeks of bad sleep and moving wrong on his left leg where something had happened that hadn't healed right, wearing a jacket that wasn't his jacket, and boots that were worn through at the heel, and eyes that were exactly as Ronan remembered them. Alive, electric, the eyes of a man who walked into rooms and immediately became the room's organizing principle, whether he tried to or not. Jackson Mercer stood in the doorway of the Iron Gate and looked at Ronan across the parking lot, and neither of them moved. Behind Jackson, inside the bar, something fell. A glass, a chair, the particular crash of a situation accelerating past the point where anyone was managing it anymore. And then Raymond Fallon's voice came through the open door, sharp and carrying, and said a single sentence that changed the shape of everything still to come. The sentence that meant the next 60 seconds were going to determine whether 2 years of Jackson's work and 8 months of Whitaker's and 24 hours of Ronan's all amounted to something, or whether Raymond Fallon walked out of Blackridge and disappeared again into the architecture of money and distance and insulation that had kept him invisible for a decade. Jackson's eyes found Ronan's, and Ronan was already moving. Ronan was already moving when Fallon's sentence landed in the air of the Iron Gate. What Fallon said was 3 words: a name, an instruction, the kind of compact command that men like him used when they had run out of infrastructure and were down to the last instrument available. The name was a Blackridge PD officer stationed 2 blocks over. The instruction was to burn the documentation before federal agents could log it into evidence. 3 words, spoken into a phone that Ronan had believed was disconnected, that Fallon had palmed from the bar surface in the 90 seconds everyone's attention had been on Jackson. Ronan hit Fallon's arm first, not his body. The specific strike that ended a phone call by ending the hand holding the phone. The device went across the floor. Fallon turned with the controlled aggression of a man who had not survived a decade of invisible operations by being slow, and the next 8 seconds were close and ugly and conducted entirely within the width of the Iron Gate's narrow space between the bar and the wall. Jackson came in from the left side. He was moving wrong on his leg and had been since he came through the door, but wrong didn't mean stopped. It meant modified, weight shifted, the adaptation of a man who had spent weeks operating in conditions that required him to function through damage. He got his arm around Fallon's from behind, and Ronan took the front, and it ended with Fallon against the bar, with his face on the wood, and both arms behind him and breathing in the specific pattern of someone running a damage calculation and finding the results unfavorable. Tank appeared in the doorway, then Vessel. Then the cold morning light behind them, and the sound of Whitaker's vehicles in the parking lot. Deacon had not moved from his position at the bar's far end. He stood with both hands visible and his eyes on the floor in the posture of a man who had been waiting for the moment of completion for a long time and was experiencing it now with the exhausted absence of surprise. Whitaker came through the door. She looked at the room. Fallon restrained, Deacon standing down, Ronan and Jackson both standing, both damaged, both upright. And she made the assessment in approximately 4 seconds and said, "Marsh," and Deacon raised his eyes and said, "I'll cooperate. Everything. Whatever you need." His voice had no resistance left in it. It was the voice of a structure that had already come down. 2 agents moved to Fallon. Whitaker crossed to Jackson and looked at the way he was standing and said quietly, "You need a medic." "After," he said. "Now, Mercer." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the specific authority of someone who had been managing an 8-month federal operation and was not going to watch its principal witness collapse from an untreated injury on the floor of a motorcycle club bar on the morning everything concluded. "Fine," he said. She put her hand briefly on his arm. Not a gesture of comfort exactly, more the gesture of acknowledgement, of one person telling another that the cost was seen and registered. And then she was back in the operational mode that was her natural state, and the room was full of federal process, and Ronan stepped back and let it be what it needed to be. He leaned against the wall near the door. His ribs were sending specific and detailed complaints northward. His left arm was functional, but communicative. He breathed through all of it and watched the room and let himself, for the first time in 24 hours, stop moving forward and simply stand still. Jackson found him there. He came and stood beside him against the wall, the 2 of them shoulder to shoulder in the bar they had spent 22 years of nights in, watching federal agents process the end of something that had been building for longer than either of them had understood while it was building. A medic had wrapped Jackson's ribs. The injury was cracked, not broken, the medic had said. and Jackson had said there was a difference, and the medic had said yes, about 6 weeks, and Jackson had nodded as if 6 weeks was a reasonable price for the current morning. They stood together and said nothing for a while. Then Jackson said, "I need to tell you something." "Curtis Dean," Ronan said. A pause. "You know." "Whitaker told me, this morning." He kept his eyes on the room. "I've had a few hours with it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, dense with the specific weight of two men who had known each other long enough to understand that some conversations needed to be approached from the right angle, and that finding the right angle sometimes required more time than the immediate moment allowed. "Later," Ronan said. "Not here." Jackson exhaled. "Yeah. But Jax..." Ronan turned and looked at him directly for the first time since the parking lot, looked at the face that was the same face and a different face simultaneously, the face of the man he knew and the face of a man who had been carrying a foundational secret for 15 years and was now, finally, in the day of its full exposure. "Later happens. You understand what I'm saying?" Jackson held his gaze. Something in him steadied. "Yeah," he said. "I understand." "Good." Ronan looked back at the room. "Now let's go get coffee. I've been awake for 24 hours, and I am finished with this building for today." May's Diner on Route 9 smelled of bacon and hot coffee and the specific warmth of a room that had been reliably open since before most of its customers were born. May refilled their cups without being asked and did not comment on the condition of the two men in the back booth, which was the specific social grace of a woman who had been pouring coffee in a town like Blackridge for 31 years and had learned that some mornings asked only for coffee and quiet and the courtesy of not being looked at too carefully. Harper sat across from them. She wrapped her hands around her mug and looked at the table for a moment and then looked at Ronan and said, "Emma Caldwell is with Whitaker's team. She's alive and she's coherent, and she asked about her father." She paused. She asked if he was in trouble. Ronan thought about Shepard in the salvage yard office, with his hands flat on the desk and his eyes closed, saying his daughter's name in the dark. "She'll see him," Ronan said. "Whatever happens with his case, she'll see him." Harper nodded. She drank her coffee. Outside on Route 9, the morning traffic was beginning. The first trucks heading toward the highway, a school bus in the far distance, the town resuming the ordinary machinery of a day that did not know what the night before it had contained. Jackson had not spoken since they sat down. He was looking at the window, at the morning outside it, with the expression of a man reacquainting himself with the ordinary world after an extended absence. His coffee was in front of him. He hadn't touched it. Then he said, without turning from the window, "I have a daughter who drew maps on napkins to save my life." He said it quietly, like a fact he was testing for weight, holding it up to see how it felt to say out loud. "Yeah," Ronan said. "She's 8. "I know how old she is." Jackson turned from the window. His eyes were tired and clear, and carrying the specific expression of a man who has come through something enormous and is beginning, slowly, to locate on the other side of it the things that actually matter. "I need to see her." "I know," Ronan said. "Finish your coffee." He reached across the table and pushed the mug toward Jackson, and Jackson picked it up and drank, and outside the light kept coming up over Blackridge, gold and cold and indifferent and real. Claire was in the kitchen of the Federal Safe House when they arrived, and she heard Jackson's step on the stairs, and the sound of it stopped her in the middle of everything. She turned. She looked at him for 3 full seconds and said, "You absolute idiot." And the last word broke, but got out, and Jackson crossed the kitchen, and they met in the middle, and the fact of him, alive, present, real, produced a sound from somewhere in Claire that had no word attached to it. Ronan stepped back into the hallway. He stood with his back against the wall and his eyes on the ceiling and breathed. His ribs communicated. His arm communicated. The last 24 hours communicated all at once, the full accumulated inventory of it moving through him like a tide going out, taking everything that had been held in suspension with it. He heard small feet on the stairs. Mila stood at the top, still in her coat, looking down at him with her father's eyes. She looked past him toward the kitchen sounds, the sounds of her parents, the specific textures of 2 voices she had been listening to her whole life, now reunited in the ordinary space of a kitchen, and her face did something young and old at once. The particular emotional simultaneity of a child who has been holding themselves together through something adult-sized and is now finally, safely allowed to stop. She came down the stairs and walked past Ronan and into the kitchen. He heard Jackson say her name. Just her name. Nothing else. And the silence after it was the fullest silence in the house. 3 months later, on a May evening, Mila stood on the porch and watched a line of motorcycles come up the road. 8 bikes. Ronan on the lead, Tank behind him, the others in formation, leather and chrome moving through the gold evening light. They stopped at the foot of the driveway and the engines idled, and Jackson came out of the house and walked down the porch steps and stood at Ronan's bike, and Ronan cut the engine. The others followed, one by one, until the street held only birdsong, and the distant highway and the spring wind. Mila came down the steps and crossed the yard and stood at her father's side. She looked at the men on the bikes, at their damaged, careful faces, at the specific way they held themselves, dangerous and steady and present, and she looked at Ronan. "Thank you," she said. Ronan looked at her. "You did most of it." She considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then she nodded, once accepting the accuracy of it, and leaned very slightly into her father's side, and Jackson's hand came down on her shoulder, real and warm and there. The road ran east and west, and in every direction at once into a world that was still hard, and still complicated, and still full of things that required navigating. None of that had changed. The road did not get easier. It got more known, which was different, and it got more shared, which was better. The engines stayed quiet. The evening held, and a group of people who had paid for this particular moment, with everything they had stood together in the last gold light of a May evening in Blackridge, and none of them looked back down the road they'd come from, because the road they were on was finally, for the first time in a long time, going somewhere worth riding toward.